The summer sun beat down relentlessly on the Interstate 75 rest stop, its asphalt shimmering in the heat. Families wandered lazily between vending machines and picnic tables, seeking brief relief from long road trips. The scent of fried food from the snack stand mixed with gasoline fumes drifting from the fuel pumps. Children laughed, chasing each other around the trash cans, while exhausted travelers leaned against their vehicles, scrolling through phones or checking maps. Trucks rumbled past, the low hum of tires on concrete blending with the distant roar of traffic on the interstate. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable except for the tension no one could yet see. Amid the crowd, a man in his late 30s approached the picnic tables, holding the hand of a small girl no older than 3. She looked fragile, her dress slightly dirty, mismatched shoes clinging to tiny feet, and a tattered stuffed rabbit hugged tightly against her chest. Her eyes, wide and wary, darted across the lot as if searching for something or someone. The man's grip on her hand was firm, almost tight, though he smiled politely at a passing family. The girl did not return the smile. Near a shaded corner, off-duty K-9 officer Daniel Brooks leaned against his patrol vehicle, casually watching the rest stop with Ranger, his German shepherd, lying obediently at his side. Ranger's ears flicked toward the laughter of children and the chatter of travelers, but he remained still, trained to watch without being obvious. Brooks was accustomed to spotting danger in the ordinary. The way a parent hesitated too long near a crosswalk, the subtle tension in a driver's stance. But today, his attention was drawn by something subtler. The little girl stopped in her tracks. She raised her small hand, carefully folding her fingers over her thumb, holding it briefly before the man tugged it down. Her eyes flickered toward Ranger, a quick glance that was almost imperceptible, yet sharp and deliberate. The man's face momentarily tightened, his jaw clenching ever so slightly, but he laughed nervously at a passerby, attempting to mask the tension. Most people around them remained oblivious, caught up in their snacks, drinks, or phones. Ranger's ears pricked sharply. Brooks noticed the change immediately. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable to an untrained eye, the girl's hand, the fleeting glance at the dog, but something in Ranger's posture shifted. The dog's tail stiffened, his muscles tensing, and a soft whine escaped from his throat. He was not reacting to the crowd, nor the sun, nor the trucks rumbling past. He was reacting to the child. The man began to move again, leading the girl toward a dark blue SUV parked a few rows away. The child's steps were slow, hesitant, as if she wanted to resist but knew she had no choice. Ranger rose to his feet, his paws scraping softly against the pavement. He followed them a few steps, then sat firmly, blocking the girl's path. Brooks noticed a subtle growl rising in his throat, not aggressive but warning. The dog had detected something instinctively wrong, something humans might overlook until it was too late. Brooks' heart rate increased slightly. He didn't intervene immediately. He had learned to watch, to assess. The man's behavior was off, not overtly violent but hurried, anxious, too smooth, almost rehearsed. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his hand brushing against the girl's arm more than necessary. Brooks discreetly reached for his phone, ready to call for backup if needed. He had seen many situations escalate in seconds. Today, he had a gut feeling, the kind that told him to stay alert. Meanwhile, the girl's tiny hand twitched nervously, brushing against the fabric of her rabbit. She paused mid-step, looking back at Ranger. There was recognition there, a silent plea. Brooks had seen it before, children who instinctively knew whom to trust, and dogs who understood that trust instantly. Ranger's gaze locked onto the girl, unwavering. He was silent still, but every muscle in his body radiated tension, alertness, and readiness. The man adjusted his hold on the girl, speaking softly, trying to reassure her. "Come on, honey, let's get some water," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The girl didn't respond. Her lips quivered slightly, but she kept her gaze on Ranger, on Brooks, on anyone who might notice. Then, almost imperceptibly, she pressed her thumb back into her palm, fingers curling over it again. A second, desperate signal. Brooks' pulse quickened. He had trained for moments like this, studied warning signs, and now he was seeing them in real life. Ranger's ears tilted forward, his body low and ready, tail stiff, eyes fixed. The dog would not leave the child. The man tried to steer her around Ranger, but the dog subtly positioned himself between them, blocking the path without aggression. Passers-by thought it was a dog being playful, unaware of the high stakes unfolding before them. The little girl's fingers twitched again. She leaned slightly toward Ranger as if asking for protection, and in that instant Brooks knew he had to act, but subtly. He couldn't scare the man, couldn't start a panic. He walked closer, pretending to admire Ranger's alertness, keeping his tone casual. "He's a smart dog, isn't he?" Brooks said softly, making eye contact with the child. Her eyes lit up faintly, the first sign of hope since she'd entered the rest stop. The man's grip tightened instinctively. His face betrayed a flicker of frustration and fear. He looked around nervously, noticing a few travelers staring at the girl and the dog, though they didn't yet understand why. Brooks kept his calm, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. Ranger sat, growled softly, not at the man, but as a signal, a warning, a shield. The subtle dance of tension escalated. Every second counted. The sun continued to beat down on the lot, trucks roared past, children laughed, and adults carried on obliviously. But in one corner, a small drama was unfolding. A tiny girl, a potentially dangerous man, and a dog whose instincts were sharper than any human's. Brooks watched, ready to intervene, knowing that the ordinary could suddenly become extraordinary and possibly tragic within moments. The little girl glanced back once more, her eyes meeting Brooks and Ranger. A silent understanding passed between them. She had given the signal, the warning, and now she waited. Ranger would protect her. Brooks would act. The man, unaware of the storm quietly forming around him, continued toward his SUV. But in the next few moments, everything would change, and the rest stop would no longer be ordinary. Even from a distance, Brooks could feel the tension tighten like a bowstring. Ranger's growl deepened, low and measured. The dog was ready to move, ready to protect, and ready to ensure that a 3-year-old's courage would not go unnoticed. And as the man adjusted the girl's dress and tried to hurry her along, neither he nor anyone else could predict that the smallest gestures, a thumb hidden, a glance toward a dog, would soon unravel a terrifying secret. Brooks' fingers brushed the phone in his pocket. Dispatch would soon be alerted. Ranger's eyes never left the child, and the little girl, clutching her rabbit tightly, silently hoped that someone, anyone, would notice. The summer heat did nothing to dull the moment. Instead, it magnified the tension, the danger, the urgency. Every second stretched longer. Every step, every twitch of the girl's fingers, every glance from Ranger could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. In that crowded rest stop, where laughter and engine noise mingled with the scent of snacks and fuel, an extraordinary moment was about to unfold. The world around them remained oblivious, but in the eyes of a child and the instincts of a dog, danger had already been identified, and the race to protect innocence quietly began. The little girl's fingers still curled tightly over her thumb, hidden from the man's view. She clutched her rabbit like a lifeline, tiny knuckles whitening with fear. Ranger's eyes followed her every move. The German shepherd's instincts were flawless. He could sense unease, fear, and danger before a human could comprehend them. His ears twitched, tail stiffened, and a soft growl rumbled from deep in his chest, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. But Officer Daniel Brooks, watching carefully, recognized it immediately. Ranger had detected distress, the silent signal that only a trained eye or a child desperate to be understood could initiate. The man, now aware of the dog, adjusted his pace, gripping the girl's hand with a stronger force. "Let's get some water, sweetie," he said, his voice a touch too quick, too practiced. The child didn't respond. Her gaze remained on Ranger, on Brooks, on anyone who might notice her silent plea. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply waited, the tiniest hint of hope shining through her fear. Brooks' mind raced. He was off-duty, out of uniform, and surrounded by ordinary civilians. Intervening required subtlety. Startling the man could provoke a sudden, dangerous reaction. But he couldn't ignore Ranger's alertness, nor the child's quiet distress. Brooks subtly shifted closer, positioning himself near a trash bin, pretending to tie his shoe while keeping the dog and the girl in view. Ranger's gaze never left the child. The man's SUV, dark blue and parked near the edge of the lot, gleamed under the sun. He guided her toward it, speaking softly. "Come on, honey, don't dawdle." But she hesitated, stepping slowly, her hand twitching toward Ranger's fur. The dog's low growl intensified, a warning that resonated in the air like a pulse of tension. The man glanced over his shoulder, frowning. Something about the dog's behavior unnerved him. Ranger's silent, unwavering presence was unyielding, and the man's facade of calm began to crack. Brooks' pulse quickened. He had trained for moments like this, scanning for subtle indicators, how a hand held too tightly, a child's tiny microexpressions, a dog's tension. Ranger had now positioned himself strategically between the girl and the SUV, his body low, ready to move if the child's safety was threatened. He was not aggressive, but he was unmovable. Anyone unfamiliar would think the dog was being playful or stubborn, but Brooks knew better. The girl's hand twitched again. She shifted slightly toward Ranger, brushing the fur lightly, seeking comfort. Brooks recognized the signal for what it was, a child trained to call for help in a subtle, almost invisible way. It was a quiet gesture, designed for adults to notice only if they were aware, trained, or paying attention. And in that moment, the crowded rest stop, filled with families, travelers, and truckers, became a stage for an invisible drama that few would witness. The man began muttering under his breath, frustration creeping into his tone. "Don't dawdle, come on." His voice carried urgency masked as casual instruction. He glanced nervously at the bystanders. A few had started to notice the tension, the girl's reluctance, the dog's focused gaze, but most remained oblivious, absorbed in snacks, conversations, or phone screens. Time slowed for Brooks. Every second mattered. Every movement could escalate into something dangerous. Brooks discreetly pressed a button on his phone, opening the voice note function to record the interaction subtly while keeping his hands nonchalant. He spoke softly to himself, as if commenting on Ranger. "Good boy, stay with her. Watch her." Ranger's ears twitched in response, as if understanding the urgency. The little girl's eyes sparkled briefly with hope, the first sign of trust in a terrifying situation. She clutched her rabbit tighter and moved slightly toward Ranger, as if drawn by an unspoken bond between child and dog. The man's agitation grew. He tugged at her arm, attempting to steer her around Ranger, but the dog subtly blocked the path, sitting low and tense. Brooks noted the man's body language, jerky movements, nervous glances, fingers flexing and unclenching repeatedly. The man's breathing had quickened, almost imperceptibly, but enough to signal discomfort. The child's own breathing was shallow, her body stiff, but she remained poised, aware that Ranger and Brooks were watching. Brooks kept his voice calm, casual. "He's a good dog, isn't he?" he said aloud, addressing no one in particular. The girl's eyes flickered, recognition flashing briefly. She relaxed slightly, realizing she was not alone. Ranger's posture remained vigilant. The man's eyes narrowed. He realized someone had noticed something. Panic began to flicker behind his eyes, though he forced a neutral expression. Brooks assessed the situation quickly. He couldn't intervene violently, not here, not now. The rest stop was filled with civilians, vehicles, and unpredictable variables, but he could call for backup discreetly. He slid his finger toward the emergency dial on his phone. Ranger's gaze remained locked on the child, unblinking, unwavering. The dog's instincts were flawless. He understood that the child needed protection, and he would provide it at all costs. The girl's thumb twitched again, curling into her palm, her fingers folding tightly over it. It was a second signal, a silent plea, a confirmation. Brooks recognized it immediately. This was not an accidental gesture. She had been trained to use it, likely taught by a parent to communicate danger discreetly. Her tiny hand, so fragile, had initiated a chain reaction that could potentially save her life. Ranger growled softly, and Brooks' finger hovered over the emergency button. The man muttered under his breath again, trying to maintain composure. "Just get in the car." His voice carried fake calm, but his eyes betrayed unease. He noticed a few bystanders staring, but none truly understood what was happening. Brooks pretended to adjust Ranger's leash, standing upright as if nothing were wrong. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to act. Ranger remained seated in front of the child, tail stiff, eyes trained, growl low but warning. Then, almost imperceptibly, the little girl stepped slightly sideways, brushing her hand along Ranger's fur. She leaned just a fraction as if asking for protection. Ranger's ears twitched. The growl shifted in tone, more urgent, almost a message to the man. Do not approach. The tension between predator and prey, child and abductor, had crystallized. Brooks' eyes scanned for potential exits, backup routes, and bystanders who could assist if necessary. Every instinct screamed that the situation could escalate at any moment. The man's jaw tightened. He glanced around again, noticing the tension in the crowd, the dog's unwavering focus, the little girl's silent plea. Panic was flickering in his eyes now, a dangerous mix of fear and desperation. Ranger shifted slightly, moving his weight to reinforce his position between the girl and the SUV. The child's eyes met Brooks once more, a tiny spark of hope lighting her terrified expression. Brooks nodded subtly, reassuring her without words. Time seemed suspended. The man attempted a subtle tug on the child's hand, but Ranger leaned forward slightly, a silent blockade. The dog's growl grew, measured but warning. Bystanders began to glance over, noticing something unusual, though none could comprehend its gravity. Brooks pressed his finger against the emergency button, ready to alert local authorities without alarming the suspect. The little girl clutched her rabbit, whispering to herself in tiny, trembling breaths, waiting for someone to understand, for someone to notice, for someone to save her. And in that moment, as the summer sun blazed overhead, trucks rumbled past, children laughed, and families wandered the lot. A quiet drama of life and death unfolded in a corner of the rest stop. A 3-year-old girl, a dog with instincts sharper than steel, and an ordinary man with dangerous intentions were poised on the edge of discovery. The stage was set, and the first act of this extraordinary real-life rescue was about to begin. The little girl's tiny fingers curled tightly around her stuffed rabbit, her knuckles pale. She glanced once more at Ranger, who sat motionless, muscles coiled, eyes never leaving her. The man's grip on her hand tightened, his jaw stiff. He forced a smile at a passing family, but it didn't reach his eyes. Something was wrong. Brooks noticed the subtle twitch in the man's shoulder, the way his gaze darted nervously across the rest stop. The child's posture was rigid, hesitant. Each step toward the SUV was slow, reluctant, as though she knew danger lurked just behind the polished exterior of the vehicle. Ranger shifted slightly, circling in a protective pattern, growling low but controlled. Brooks' instincts flared. This was no ordinary situation. The little girl had given a silent signal and the dog had noticed. Both were asking for help quietly, subtly. Brooks remained calm, pretending to check his phone, though he was actively assessing the environment. He scanned the lot for potential hazards, exits, and witnesses. The man's behavior was now unmistakably suspicious. Too smooth, too rehearsed, too deliberate. "Don't dawdle," the man muttered under his breath, jerking the girl slightly toward the SUV. His words were soft, meant to be casual, but his urgency betrayed him. The girl's feet shuffled, dragging slightly as she resisted. She leaned toward Ranger again, brushing his fur with her tiny hand. The dog stiffened, growling softly, a warning, a shield, a barrier between the girl and her captor. Brooks' finger hovered near his emergency dial. Time was critical. Every second the man delayed. The girl's safety hung by a thread. The man's eyes flicked nervously at bystanders. A few had noticed Ranger's tense posture, the girl's hesitancy, but none fully grasped the danger. Brooks considered the options. Any sudden movement could provoke the man. He couldn't shout, couldn't rush in, couldn't risk a panicked reaction from a desperate adult with a child in his control. But he could communicate subtly with Ranger, who already understood the stakes. The dog's body language was perfect, non-aggressive to the world, but unyielding in protection. The girl whispered softly, almost inaudibly, a tiny voice that seemed to float above the noise of the rest stop. "Please help me." Her lips quivered. She pressed her thumb again into her palm, folding her fingers over it. Ranger responded immediately, a low, steady growl vibrating through his chest. Brooks' stomach tightened. He was trained for this, but instinct alone told him that what he was witnessing could escalate into something dangerous in the next moment. The man's face tightened. His smile had vanished, replaced by a thin line of irritation and growing panic. "Come on," he urged, his grip firmer now, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone watching too closely. Brooks noticed the tension in his fingers, the way his hand flexed repeatedly. It was nervous energy, a subtle signal that he knew something was off but couldn't fully control it. Ranger's eyes remained locked on the girl. The dog's ears flicked constantly, scanning for additional threats. Brooks took a slow, deliberate step closer, pretending to admire Ranger. "Good boy," he said casually, keeping his tone light. "You're very alert today, huh?" The girl's eyes lit up faintly. She recognized Brooks' voice, his presence, and Ranger's readiness. It was a small moment of reassurance, but enough to remind her that she was not alone. The man's gaze flicked toward Brooks, and a flicker of fear crossed his features. The little girl adjusted her grip on the rabbit, leaning slightly closer to Ranger. She whispered again, "Not my daddy." It was the first coherent phrase Brooks had heard from her. The man froze, his jaw tightening, a shadow of panic crossing his features. Ranger responded immediately, moving subtly to block the man's path to the SUV, low and steady. Brooks' heart pounded. The quiet drama unfolding here was invisible to most, yet potentially life-saving. Brooks continued to engage casually with the man, asking questions about the road, the weather, the heat. Each question was designed to maintain calm while buying critical seconds. The girl's whispered signals and Ranger's protective presence formed a silent line of defense. The man's agitation grew with each passing moment, his movements jerky, uncertain. He glanced at the SUV again, then back at Brooks, trying to assess the situation. The crowd, still largely unaware, had begun to notice subtle oddities. A mother shielding her toddler glanced toward the girl, noticing her hesitancy. A trucker paused while unloading supplies, observing the dog's posture. Most assumed the dog was playful or overprotective, and the child was shy. No one yet understood the gravity of the moment. Brooks remained calm, his eyes constantly shifting, tracking both the child and the man. The little girl pressed her thumb into her palm a third time, her fingers folding tightly over it. Ranger responded with a soft but unmistakable growl, his entire body radiating readiness. Brooks' mind raced. He had to maintain the illusion of normalcy while preparing to intervene. He could feel adrenaline surging through him, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. The man tugged at the girl again, his voice sharper now. "Come on." The girl froze, planting her feet. Ranger moved slightly, placing his chest between her and the man, blocking access without threatening anyone else. Brooks subtly shifted his position, one hand brushing his phone. He prepared to dial emergency services without alarming the man, every motion designed to avoid panic. The child's eyes met his, wide and trusting, filled with the fragile hope that someone would see her and act. The man's panic escalated. He glanced around frantically, realizing that someone or something was watching him too closely. His breathing quickened. Ranger's growl deepened, low and steady. The tension between the man, the child, and the dog now dominated the rest stop. Passers-by sensed it without understanding why. Time seemed to stretch as Brooks weighed his options. One wrong move could escalate the situation. One correct move could save a life. The girl whispered again, just audible enough for Brooks to hear, "Please help me." Ranger's response was immediate, a step forward, a low growl vibrating in his chest. The dog's protective instinct had kicked in fully. Brooks' heart pounded. He had to wait for the precise moment to act. The man tugged harder at her hand, panic flashing in his eyes. He didn't know the child's silent pleas had been noticed by a vigilant dog and an alert officer. Brooks took a subtle step closer. "He's very obedient," Brooks said casually, gesturing to Ranger. "You've trained him well." The man's attention flicked to Brooks. For a split second, uncertainty passed across his face. It was all Brooks needed. Ranger shifted slightly, still between the child and the man. The little girl's lips quivered as she whispered once more, "Not my daddy." The word, so small and frail, hung in the summer air, charged with silent desperation. The man's agitation reached a peak. He tightened his grip, his jaw clenched, and his eyes darted to the crowd. Ranger remained steadfast, alert, unwavering. Brooks pressed a finger to his phone, ready to notify local authorities discreetly. The little girl clung to her rabbit, her trust placed entirely in the dog and the man she hoped was an ally. The stakes were high, tension unbearable, and the rest stop, a place of mundane travel, was now the center of a quiet but intense battle for survival. In that moment, time slowed. The man's panic, the child's subtle signals, Ranger's unwavering protection, and Brooks' careful observation intertwined into a silent drama that could end in tragedy or rescue. Every muscle, every heartbeat, every whisper counted. And as the sun beat down, the trucks roared past, and the crowds remained mostly oblivious, the invisible threads of danger and protection wound tighter, preparing for the critical moment when the first breakthrough would finally occur. The man's grip on the little girl tightened again as he glanced over his shoulder. His eyes flicked nervously toward a patrol car slowly approaching the rest stop. Brooks had called it in moments ago, keeping the line quiet while maintaining the pretense of casual observation. Ranger shifted slightly, low and taut, still between the child and the man. The dog's growl was a low, warning vibration, a protective pulse that made the air seem heavier. The man's unease was now undeniable. He tried to mask it, muttering under his breath, but the tension in his body betrayed him. The patrol car glided into the lot with lights off, slowing to a cautious crawl. Two deputies inside scanned the area, eyes sharp, posture alert. Brooks subtly gestured with his hand, signaling them toward the location without drawing attention to the unfolding drama. The man's head jerked slightly as he noticed the vehicle. His grip on the girl's hand tightened to the point where her tiny knuckles whitened. She flinched but did not cry, still holding her rabbit and staring resolutely at Ranger. Deputies stepped out of the vehicle, moving with a calm efficiency. One deputy approached, keeping voice low and neutral. "Afternoon. Everything okay here?" The man forced a smile, trying to appear casual. "Yes, ma'am, we're just heading out. She's a little tired from the drive." His words were smooth but slightly too quick, each syllable calculated. Ranger's low growl intensified. Brooks' pulse quickened. The child's eyes flickered toward him, filled with silent hope. The signal had been noticed, and help had arrived, but danger was still very real. The deputy glanced at the child. "Can we see some ID?" Her lips trembled as she whispered her name, a name different from the one the man had given. The discrepancy was subtle, but Brooks noticed instantly. Ranger's ears twitched, eyes locked on the man. The suspect's smile faltered, a shadow of panic crossing his face. He muttered something under his breath, clearly calculating his options. Time stretched thin, each moment pregnant with risk. A second deputy approached the SUV, crouching slightly to get a better view of the license plate. "Plate check real quick," she said into her radio. The man's agitation became more apparent. He stepped toward the child, urging her to the vehicle. Brooks remained calm, keeping his eyes on both the child and the man, ready to intervene at the first sign of escalation. Ranger moved subtly, positioning himself so the man could not pass without noticing the dog's unwavering gaze. Seconds later, the radio crackled. The SUV was registered in Chattanooga, stolen 48 hours ago. The man's eyes widened and a thin sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Ranger growled, deep and resonant, his body vibrating with tension. The child whispered almost inaudibly, "That's not my daddy." The words hung in the air like a delicate thread, fragile but deadly in their significance. Deputies immediately separated the man from the child. One stepped in front of the SUV, another flanked him, hands ready but calm. The man tried to protest, flustered, shaking his head. "It's a mistake. I'm her father, you don't understand." His voice cracked under the pressure. The girl, meanwhile, moved closer to Ranger, her tiny hand brushing the dog's fur. The German shepherd remained steadfast, silent but vigilant, every muscle coiled to protect her. Brooks moved slightly, positioning himself near the child. "It's okay," he whispered gently. "You're safe now." The little girl's eyes, wide with relief, reflected trust and gratitude. Ranger sat calmly beside her, chest rising and falling steadily, his growls ceasing only slightly. The man, now handcuffed and flanked by deputies, began to tremble. The rest stop, once mundane, was now a scene of controlled chaos. Passers-by had begun to notice the commotion, murmuring amongst themselves, but the full gravity of the situation was still hidden to most. The deputies radioed for confirmation on the stolen vehicle report. Dispatch confirmed the SUV had been reported missing, matching the man's description. Officers carefully guided the girl away from the SUV and toward a patrol vehicle, allowing her to remain close to Ranger. She clutched the dog's fur, lips quivering as she whispered about the signal she had made earlier. Her bravery, combined with Ranger's instinct, had prevented a potentially tragic outcome. Nearby travelers stared, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others holding children a little closer. Brooks noticed a mother whispering to her toddler, likely explaining that the dog was being very careful and attentive. Ranger, oblivious to the humans around him, focused entirely on the girl, tail still stiff but movements controlled. The child's relief was palpable, her small shoulders relaxed, her breathing steadying as the danger diminished. The man, now secured and sitting on the curb, tried to argue. "I didn't do anything, she's mine." Deputies ignored him, prioritizing the child's safety and comfort. Brooks gently guided her toward the patrol vehicle, kneeling so he was at her level. "You're safe now," he repeated softly, careful not to frighten her further. She hugged Ranger's neck tightly, whispering gratitude. Her small voice, almost inaudible over the hum of traffic and chatter, carried immense relief and quiet courage. Dispatch ran additional checks on the man, linking him to 2 prior suspicious encounters along the route. Brooks' suspicions were confirmed. This was not a simple misunderstanding or lost child scenario. Ranger had detected the danger instinctively, responding to cues invisible to the human eye. The rest stop, once ordinary and mundane, had become the site of a quiet but extraordinary rescue. The little girl, though only 3, had taken courageous steps to alert someone, anyone who could protect her. Brooks allowed the deputies to lead her mother toward the scene. The woman arrived moments later, frazzled and frantic, having been notified by dispatch. Her eyes widened as she saw her daughter safe, leaning against Ranger. Tears streamed down her face as she embraced her child, whispering soothing words. The girl clutched her mother, then looked at Ranger, stroking his fur, a small smile breaking across her face. Ranger's job was complete, his instincts validated in the most profound way. News crews began to arrive, sensing a developing story. Travelers gathered, murmuring questions, but Brooks kept the focus on the child's safety. The little girl, comforted by her mother and the steady presence of Ranger, remained quiet, her small hands clasping the dog's fur and her mother's hand simultaneously. The suspect sat nearby, under control but visibly shaken, realizing that his plan had been thwarted by a combination of courage, training, and instinct. Brooks exhaled slowly, finally lowering the tension in his shoulders. The danger had been mitigated, the child rescued, and Ranger had proven the remarkable power of intuition and loyalty. The rest stop, once a place of routine stops and casual travel, had become the scene of a life-saving intervention. It was a quiet victory, invisible to many, but monumental to those who understood its significance. The little girl whispered again softly, "Thank you." Brooks smiled faintly, kneeling beside her. Ranger nudged her gently as if to say, "I was here. You're safe." The man, cuffed and under scrutiny, would now face the consequences of his actions. The child's bravery, combined with a dog's unwavering instincts, had altered the course of events that could have ended in tragedy. And as the sun dipped lower in the Georgia sky, the rest stop returned to the hum of ordinary life. Trucks continued down the interstate. Families resumed their breaks. Children played nearby. But in one corner, the extraordinary had quietly unfolded. A child's subtle signal, a dog's instinct, and an officer's vigilance had combined to prevent disaster. It was a moment that would not be forgotten by those involved, a real-life testament to courage, instinct, and hope. The little girl clung to Ranger's fur, her tiny hands gripping tightly, as Officer Brooks stepped back, giving her space while keeping a watchful eye. The deputies had secured the man, placing him under careful observation near the patrol car. He muttered protests, his voice wavering. "I didn't do anything, she's mine." But no one paid attention. Today, the focus was on the child, on the bravery of a tiny hand signaling for help, and on the extraordinary instincts of a German shepherd who refused to be ignored. Dispatch ran a final verification on the girl's description. Moments later, the confirmation came through. A missing child report filed from Knoxville matching her name, age, and appearance. The details fit perfectly. The report described a 3-year-old girl taken from her home 2 days prior by an unknown man. Brooks' heart tightened. The little girl whispered softly, her voice barely audible. The dog knew. Ranger's ears twitched at her words, as if acknowledging the gravity of what had just unfolded. The deputies guided the girl toward a quieter corner of the rest stop, shielding her from the growing crowd. Her tiny form pressed close to Ranger, the dog's warm fur a reassuring barrier against the fear that still lingered. The child's eyes darted briefly toward the now detained man, who struggled under the weight of cuffed hands and the realization that his plan had collapsed. Ranger growled low, a subtle reminder that danger was still within the perimeter, though under control. Brooks knelt beside the child, speaking gently. "You did the right thing, you were very brave." She sniffled, her small shoulders trembling slightly. I was scared," she admitted softly. "I didn't know what to do." Ranger nudged her gently with his snout as if to say, "You did perfectly." The interplay of trust, instinct, and courage formed a quiet but profound bond in that moment, a bond that transcended words and species. Nearby, deputies reviewed surveillance footage from the rest stop's cameras. One officer pointed toward a clip showing the man leading the child across the parking lot, tense and hurried, trying to remain unnoticed. The footage revealed the child's subtle signals, the thumb folded into her palm, a glance toward Ranger, slight hesitation in her steps. The officer shook his head in disbelief. "She did everything right," he murmured. "And that dog, he saw it all." The footage would later serve as crucial evidence in both the criminal investigation and the nationwide coverage of the story. News crews began to arrive, alerted by the tip from Dispatch. Cameras and microphones started to capture the scene. Brooks kept his attention fixed on the child, ensuring she remained calm amid the growing attention. The mother had been contacted and was en route, her panic palpable even over the phone. Brooks felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The reunion was imminent, but the child's experience had been traumatic, and he wanted to shield her from unnecessary attention until her mother arrived. The little girl shifted slightly, resting her head against Ranger's side. She whispered again, "He took me, but the dog stopped him." Brooks smiled faintly, ruffling her hair gently. Ranger's body remained taut, still vigilant, as though confirming the truth of her words. The crowd watched, captivated by the unusual sight of a child leaning on a dog with a calm confidence that seemed beyond her age. Passers-by murmured softly, awed by the partnership between child and canine that had prevented what could have been a tragedy. The suspect, seated on the curb, glared briefly at the scene but offered no resistance. Deputies exchanged notes, confirming prior complaints linked to his name. He had been involved in 2 other suspicious incidents along the route, but no children had been harmed, until now, thwarted only by a child's courage and a dog's instinctive response. Ranger's vigilance had not allowed even a moment of miscalculation. The little girl's bravery had not only alerted someone, but also directly guided the outcome of this intervention. Brooks knelt beside her, voice calm but firm. "You helped everyone see what was happening. You did it quietly and no one got hurt." She looked up, her eyes wide, reflecting both the residual fear and the emerging pride of knowing she had been brave enough to act. Ranger nudged her hand with his nose, and she squeezed it in return. The deputies watched silently, recognizing the extraordinary chain of events that had unfolded in mere moments. Within minutes, the mother arrived, her face pale and tear-streaked, her voice trembling with relief. She ran toward her daughter, kneeling and enveloping her in a tight embrace. The child's small arms wrapped around her mother, then instinctively reached for Ranger, stroking his fur. "He helped me," she whispered softly. Tears streamed down the mother's face. "Oh my God, thank you," she murmured, not only to the officers and deputies but to the dog whose presence had protected her child. Brooks stood nearby, letting the mother and child share their reunion while keeping the scene calm. Ranger remained seated beside the little girl, his gaze alert, tail slowly wagging as he relaxed slightly, reassured that the immediate danger had passed. The rest stop, now filled with quiet observers and the low hum of traffic, had become the stage for a remarkable rescue. Ordinary civilians were witnessing the extraordinary bond between human and dog, courage and instinct, that had changed the course of a child's life. Dispatch coordinated with local authorities in Knoxville, confirming details of the missing child report and ensuring that the child would be returned home safely. The suspect would be transported for questioning, and the SUV impounded as evidence. The incident would later attract statewide attention, and news crews began recording footage for broadcast. Brooks noticed the little girl's small hand reaching toward Ranger again, brushing his fur with gratitude and trust. The mother held her child tightly, whispering comfort and reassurance. The child leaned slightly, whispering again, "I did what I was supposed to do." Ranger responded with a subtle nuzzle. Brooks observed silently, feeling the full impact of what had just occurred. A child's courage, a dog's instinct, and an officer's vigilance had intersected to prevent a potentially devastating outcome. The simplicity of her hand gesture had carried immense weight, proving that even the smallest actions could have life-saving consequences. The crowd murmured quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others taking careful notes. News crews began interviewing deputies and Brooks, but cameras stayed clear of the child, respecting her privacy. Ranger, though relaxed, remained close, alert, and aware. Brooks spoke briefly to the reporters. "Sometimes heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they have 4 legs, and sometimes they're only 3 years old." The phrase captured the extraordinary, almost surreal quality of the day. The child's mother finally spoke softly to Brooks. "I don't know how to thank you, or him," she said, gesturing toward Ranger. Brooks simply smiled. "He did his job, you taught her well, and Ranger just followed his instincts." The mother nodded, tears still flowing, understanding that what had unfolded was far beyond a routine rescue. The child had been safe in moments that could have become terrifying, all because subtle signs had been noticed, interpreted, and acted upon immediately. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt, the child, her mother, and Ranger stood together. The rest stop returned to its rhythm, though a quiet reverence lingered. Travelers resumed their breaks, truck engines rumbled, and families moved toward their cars, unaware that they had witnessed a near tragedy prevented by courage, vigilance, and instinct. Brooks remained near, vigilant until the child was safely secured in her mother's vehicle. Ranger stayed close, still alert, proving that heroism often comes in unexpected forms. The little girl whispered softly one last time, resting her head against Ranger. "Thank you, I was scared, but he helped me." Brooks smiled faintly. Ranger's ears twitched as if acknowledging her words. The rest stop was quiet now, ordinary once again to the casual observer, yet extraordinary in its events. The child's bravery, Ranger's instinct, and Brooks' vigilance had created a chain of life-saving actions that would ripple beyond this small corner of Georgia. The little girl clung to her mother's side as the patrol vehicle eased away from the rest stop. Her tiny hand remained pressed against Ranger's fur, stroking him in quick, gentle motions. She looked up at Brooks, eyes wide with gratitude. "He saved me," she whispered. Brooks nodded quietly, his heart still racing from the tension that had gripped the rest stop just moments ago. Ranger's chest rose and fell steadily, tail brushing the ground as he remained alert, sensing the lingering unease in the area. The mother hugged her child tightly, whispering words of comfort. "You're safe now, baby. You're home." The girl pressed closer, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Ranger stayed between them, a protective sentinel who had guided them through a perilous situation. Brooks watched silently, noting the subtle cues of the dog's vigilant behavior. Every muscle, every gesture had contributed to the rescue. The girl's courage and Ranger's instincts had saved her life. Deputies carefully escorted the suspect to a patrol vehicle, ensuring he remained calm but secure. His face was pale, tension etched into every line. He glanced at the girl one last time, realizing the plan he had meticulously attempted had failed. Ranger's growl had been more than just a sound. It had been a barrier no adult could breach, a shield for the most vulnerable. Brooks felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the combination of instinct, training, and human vigilance had averted disaster. The mother turned to Brooks, voice trembling. "I don't know how to thank you or him." She gestured toward Ranger, whose eyes followed the girl with unwavering focus. Brooks smiled faintly. "He did his job. You taught her well, and Ranger followed his instincts. That's all it takes sometimes: trust, courage, and paying attention." The mother nodded, tears streaming down her face. The little girl hugged Ranger tightly, whispering, "Thank you for saving me." News crews had begun to gather at a respectful distance, alerted by dispatch. Cameras rolled, microphones captured statements, but no intrusive attention was directed at the child. Brooks remained vigilant, ensuring that she felt safe. Ranger's ears twitched with every new sound, ready to react if necessary. The atmosphere was electric with curiosity, admiration, and disbelief. People were witnessing firsthand the extraordinary interplay between human courage and animal instinct. Brooks spoke briefly to the media, keeping the focus on the importance of vigilance and listening to subtle signals. "Sometimes heroes don't wear badges. Sometimes they have 4 legs. Sometimes they're just 3 years old," he said. His words captured the essence of what had occurred at the rest stop. Ranger sat calmly beside him, tail still stiff but moving slightly with contentment. The crowd murmured in appreciation, understanding the extraordinary story unfolding before them. The little girl, now seated beside her mother on a bench, kept her hands on Ranger's fur. Her small face reflected a mixture of relief, awe, and pride. She whispered again, "I was scared, but he helped me." Brooks nodded. Ranger's gaze shifted to the child, acknowledging her words with a subtle tilt of his head. The bond between the three, the girl, the dog, and the officer, was evident. It was a silent, unspoken understanding forged through fear, courage, and protection. Local authorities coordinated with the child's family to ensure a safe journey home. The mother held her daughter's hand as they walked toward their vehicle, Ranger at their side. Every passerby who noticed the trio paused briefly, sensing the importance of the moment. Children nearby pointed at Ranger. Parents whispered about the extraordinary dog, and Brooks observed with quiet pride. Ranger's presence was not just a shield. It was a symbol of instinct, loyalty, and heroism. Dispatch confirmed that the suspect would be transported to the local detention facility and processed for kidnapping and vehicle theft. Brooks stayed near the child, ensuring her comfort as deputies finalized the incident report. Ranger's presence remained a calming factor, a tangible assurance of safety. The child's small hands continued to stroke his fur, and her tiny voice whispered gratitude repeatedly. The act of giving a signal, so subtle yet life-saving, had not gone unnoticed. News coverage quickly highlighted the story. Local stations praised the child's courage and the dog's instinctive actions. Social media began to circulate footage, showing Ranger blocking the man, the child signaling, and the deputies intervening. Brooks watched silently as the story gained momentum. The little girl had become a quiet hero, her tiny gestures recognized by countless viewers. Ranger's loyalty and precision had captured the imagination of the community. Together, they had averted a tragedy in a way that felt almost cinematic. The mother hugged her child tightly one more time, whispering softly, "You're safe now. Thank you for being brave." The girl pressed her cheek against Ranger, who responded with a gentle nuzzle. Brooks knelt briefly, meeting the child's eyes. "You did the right thing. Always trust your instincts." She nodded, understanding in her small way that her courage, though quiet, had immense power. Ranger had been her silent protector, and now the world would know. Local animal authorities were called to document Ranger's involvement. Officers interviewed Brooks about the dog's training, behavior, and protective actions. Ranger sat patiently, alert but calm, ears flicking at every new sound. He had remained steady throughout, his instincts guiding every movement. Brooks spoke of the dog's training and intuition, explaining how Ranger had recognized the subtle signals and acted decisively. The story of heroism, courage, and instinct was now complete, ready to inspire countless others. The rest stop, once an ordinary place of travel and fatigue, had transformed into a stage for extraordinary events. Families resumed their journeys, truckers returned to their routes, and travelers spoke in hushed tones about the incredible rescue. Brooks observed quietly, noting the lingering impact of the event. Ranger remained beside him, calm but vigilant, a silent sentinel whose actions had prevented what could have been a devastating tragedy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lot, the little girl and her mother prepared to leave. Ranger walked with them a few steps, ensuring their path was clear. Brooks stayed behind briefly, observing the scene and allowing the gravity of the rescue to settle in. The child's courage, combined with Ranger's instincts and his own vigilance, had created a ripple effect that would be remembered for years. The story quickly spread beyond the local community. National news outlets picked up the tale of the brave child, the intuitive dog, and the vigilant officer. Interviews with Brooks highlighted the importance of paying attention to subtle cues, while footage of Ranger's protective positioning captivated audiences. Social media shared clips of the girl's tiny hand gestures and Ranger's calm, steady presence. The narrative resonated widely. Courage, instinct, and teamwork had prevented tragedy. Before leaving, Brooks knelt one last time beside the child and Ranger. "Remember," he said gently, "you were brave, you trusted him, and you trusted yourself." The girl hugged Ranger tightly, whispering, "I'll never forget." Ranger nudged her hand in response, his tail wagging slightly, affirming the bond that had formed in moments of fear and tension. Brooks stood, watching the mother and daughter drive away safely, Ranger at their side, a hero in every sense. The rest stop returned to its ordinary rhythm, but the impact of the events lingered. Travelers whispered about what they had seen, families recounted the bravery of the child and the dog, and Brooks reflected on the extraordinary outcome. Ranger, ever alert, remained by Brooks' side, a living testament to instinct, loyalty, and courage. What had begun as a quiet signal at a rest stop had blossomed into a story of heroism that would be remembered for years. By the next morning, the story of the 3-year-old girl, her quiet signals, and Ranger's heroic intervention had spread like wildfire. Local news outlets featured the rescue prominently, highlighting the child's bravery and the dog's instinctive protection. Social media amplified the story, showing footage from the rest stop, Ranger blocking the man, the little girl's subtle hand signals, and Officer Brooks' calm vigilance. Comments poured in from across the country, celebrating the courage of a toddler and the loyalty of a German shepherd who had saved her life. Meanwhile, law enforcement in Knoxville intensified their investigation into the suspect. His background was a tangle of prior complaints, suspicious activities, and minor arrests, but no previous child abductions had been confirmed. Deputies coordinated with the Georgia authorities, tracking his movements over the past 48 hours. Surveillance cameras along the interstate revealed small but critical details. Stops at convenience stores, a gas station, and the path leading to the rest stop where Ranger and Brooks had intervened. Every step he took became a piece of a puzzle that law enforcement now pieced together with meticulous care. The man remained in custody under strict supervision. He refused to speak initially, muttering incoherently about mistaken identity and false accusations. Deputies maintained control, aware that the public's attention could pressure them to act rashly. Brooks and the deputies carefully documented every action, every piece of evidence, ensuring the investigation remained airtight. The stolen SUV, now impounded, provided forensic clues, fingerprints, a partial DNA sample, and objects left behind that confirmed the suspect's intent. Ranger's role, though not directly recorded in evidence, was recognized in every report as the factor that prevented the girl from being harmed. National news crews arrived at the rest stop later that day, requesting interviews with Brooks, the deputies, and Ranger's handlers. Brooks spoke first, careful to maintain the privacy and dignity of the child while emphasizing the importance of observation and quick action. This was a case of instincts, trust, and paying attention to subtle cues, he explained. Sometimes, the most extraordinary heroes are those who act quietly unseen but with precise purpose. Ranger sat calmly beside Brooks, alert but composed, ears twitching at each new sound of cameras and microphones. The girl's mother, now home with her daughter, expressed overwhelming gratitude to Brooks, Ranger, and the deputies. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of teaching children simple but effective signals for help, subtle enough to avoid detection but visible to those trained to recognize them. Her words resonated nationally, inspiring families across the country to think proactively about safety. The child, though only 3, had become a symbol of quiet bravery, her tiny gestures amplified to a nationwide audience. Ranger's heroics captured the hearts of viewers everywhere. News footage replayed his positioning, blocking the man, remaining vigilant beside the girl, responding to her subtle cues. Experts weighed in, praising the dog's training, intuition, and ability to interpret human signals. Social media platforms were filled with hashtags celebrating Ranger, highlighting the importance of animal-assisted interventions in real-life emergencies. Brooks received dozens of emails from citizens sharing similar stories of pets alerting them to danger, all inspired by Ranger's bravery. Authorities released additional details of the suspect's movements over the past 48 hours. Evidence showed that the child's abductors had planned to take her across state lines, potentially making her recovery much more complicated. The timely intervention at the rest stop, combined with Ranger's unwavering vigilance and the child's subtle signals, had prevented a potential interstate abduction. Law enforcement emphasized the importance of remaining calm, paying attention, and recognizing unusual behavior, demonstrating how teamwork between humans and animals could avert disaster. The child's bravery, though quiet, was widely acknowledged. Psychologists noted that even at 3 years old, she had demonstrated remarkable presence of mind under extreme stress. Her subtle thumb signals, interpreted by Ranger and then acted upon by Officer Brooks, were highlighted as an example of effective, age-appropriate emergency communication. Families nationwide discussed how children could be empowered to communicate danger discreetly, and the story quickly became part of safety education campaigns. The suspect faced multiple charges: child abduction, vehicle theft, and attempted interstate kidnapping. Law enforcement emphasized that while the suspect's intentions were sinister, the child's training, Ranger's instinct, and quick police response had prevented any harm. Court proceedings were scheduled, and the suspect's face became familiar across news outlets, a stark contrast to the quiet heroism of the 3-year-old girl and her canine protector. Brooks reflected on the extraordinary teamwork between humans and animals that had unfolded in such a short time. Ranger had acted without hesitation, reading the child's micro-signals and maintaining protective behavior despite distractions, cameras, and the presence of strangers. The little girl had demonstrated bravery far beyond her years, using the tools she had been taught to silently call for help. Their combined actions created a seamless chain of rescue that would be studied and shared in law enforcement circles for years. Awards and recognition began to pour in for Ranger. Animal rescue organizations and police departments nationwide praised the dog's instincts and courage. Brooks received accolades for his calm intervention, nodding repeatedly that the real heroes were the child and Ranger. The story inspired books, articles, and public service announcements emphasizing child safety, canine training, and quick, subtle communication. Ranger's image appeared on television segments, social media posts, and news articles, a symbol of instinctive heroism. Meanwhile, the little girl settled back into her routine at home, surrounded by loving family. Her mother ensured that she received counseling to process the trauma, emphasizing comfort and reassurance. Though young, The child exhibited remarkable resilience, often pointing out Ranger in pictures and videos, explaining in her own words how he had saved her. Psychologists working with the family noted that the positive reinforcement and acknowledgement of the dog's role helped the child frame the experience as a story of courage rather than fear. As the weeks passed, Ranger returned to his daily duties, accompanied by Brooks on routine patrols. Yet his reputation had grown far beyond the small town where the incident occurred. Communities across the country hailed him as a hero dog, a symbol of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. News segments revisited the story, sharing the little girl's bravery, the dog's instincts, and the quick response that prevented tragedy. Families cited the story as an example of how attentiveness, preparation, and trust could change outcomes dramatically. The child's story continued to inspire. Safety organizations highlighted the importance of subtle signals for children, illustrating the case as a real-world example of prevention. Workshops for parents and caregivers incorporated Ranger's story, teaching children how small gestures could communicate danger effectively. The little girl's bravery became a central lesson in these programs, her quiet courage shining as an example of how even the smallest among us could make a profound difference. In retrospect, Brooks noted that the incident exemplified the delicate balance between preparation, instinct, and quick action. Ranger's behavior was not learned in that moment. It was instinctive, informed by training and intuition. The little girl's actions were deliberate, subtle, and brave. The intervention by deputies and Brooks' presence ensured that timing and execution aligned perfectly. The culmination of these factors created a rescue story that transcended ordinary experiences, leaving a lasting impact on all who witnessed or learned about it. Weeks after the dramatic rescue, life began returning to a semblance of normalcy for the little girl and her family, though the events at the rest stop remained etched in memory. The mother watched her daughter play in the backyard, still clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. The child paused occasionally, looking toward the street as if expecting Ranger to appear at her side. She whispered to her mother, "He saved me, he knew." The words were simple, but they carried immense weight, a quiet acknowledgement of the dog's courage and her own bravery. Brooks and Ranger returned to their usual patrol routines, but the dog's reputation had grown beyond the town limits. Ranger was hailed as a hero, receiving recognition from local and national organizations. A ceremony was held at the police precinct, where Brooks presented Ranger with a medal of bravery. The little girl, dressed in her Sunday best, clutched her mother's hand as she watched Ranger receive applause. She reached out to touch his fur, whispering softly, "Thank you for saving me." Ranger leaned in, his warm eyes meeting hers in a moment of mutual understanding, a bond forged in fear and courage. News outlets covered the ceremony extensively. Reports emphasized the extraordinary teamwork between the child, the dog, and law enforcement. Psychologists highlighted the girl's quick thinking, her use of subtle hand signals, and the importance of teaching children ways to alert adults to danger. Ranger became a symbol of instinctive protection and unwavering loyalty. Families across the country shared the story on social media, praising the child's bravery and the dog's heroism. The narrative inspired new campaigns about child safety, animal training, and vigilance in public spaces. The suspect's trial drew national attention. Law enforcement presented detailed evidence, including surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and a thorough timeline of events. The child's testimony, carefully guided by her mother and counselors, emphasized her fear, her small signals, and her trust in Ranger and Officer Brooks. The man's defense attempted to minimize his actions, claiming he was the child's guardian, but the overwhelming evidence, including the stolen vehicle, prior suspicious behavior, and Ranger's protective intervention, resulted in a swift conviction. Justice had been served, and the little girl's safety had been preserved. At school and in her neighborhood, the little girl became known quietly as the brave one, though she remained modest about her actions. She often recounted the story to close friends and family, emphasizing how Ranger had been by her side, reading her signals and keeping her safe. Her mother encouraged her to express her emotions freely, but she never exaggerated or embellished the events. She spoke plainly. She had been scared, she had given a signal, and Ranger had acted. It was the simplicity and honesty of her account that resonated most deeply with those who heard it. Meanwhile, Brooks continued his work, but the story of Ranger's heroism had changed the community's perception of service animals in law enforcement. Departments across the state sought to highlight the importance of canine units, sharing training techniques and case studies. Ranger became a mentor figure in these demonstrations, showcasing how instincts, training, and attentiveness could prevent tragedy. Workshops for children incorporated simulations, teaching them to use subtle signals in emergencies, often using Ranger as a live example. The child's family remained deeply connected to Ranger and Brooks. They visited him frequently at the precinct, bringing treats and offering gentle pats. Each visit was a reminder of the bond formed under intense circumstances. The little girl often whispered in Ranger's ear, recounting small details of her day, her accomplishments at preschool, and even her fears, knowing he had once kept her safe. Ranger responded with gentle nudges, subtle growls of reassurance, and the occasional wag of his tail. Their connection had become an enduring relationship, rooted in trust, courage, and shared experience. As months passed, the story continued to inspire. News segments revisited the rescue, interviewing the girl, her mother, Brooks, and Ranger's handlers. The child's narrative emphasized courage in the face of fear, the importance of communication, and the incredible intuition of service dogs. Ranger's calm yet protective demeanor became the focus of educational programs and canine training manuals, illustrating the real-world impact that dogs could have in high-stakes scenarios. His actions became a model for both police training and public awareness campaigns. The community commemorated the anniversary of the rescue with a small event at the rest stop. Families, deputies, and citizens gathered to honor the bravery displayed that day. The little girl stood beside Ranger, holding her mother's hand, smiling confidently. Brooks spoke to the crowd, emphasizing the power of observation, courage, and preparedness. Ranger sat obediently beside him, head held high. Local children learned about subtle safety signals, pet care, and the significance of teamwork in emergencies. The event was a celebration not just of the rescue, but of the lasting lessons it had taught. The story also reached lawmakers and public safety organizations, prompting discussions on child safety measures, emergency signals for young children, and support for service animals in law enforcement. Ranger's heroism provided a tangible example of how animals could play critical roles in emergency situations. The child's bravery reinforced the importance of teaching resilience, awareness, and discreet communication to children from a young age. The synergy of instinct, courage, and preparedness became a blueprint for similar safety programs nationwide. In quiet moments, the little girl would reflect on that day at the rest stop. She remembered the fear, the tension, and the courage it took to give a subtle signal. She remembered Ranger, unwavering and vigilant, his instincts guiding every movement. She remembered Brooks, calm and attentive, ready to act. And she remembered the overwhelming relief when her mother arrived, tears streaming, holding her close. These memories shaped her understanding of bravery, compassion, and trust. Years later, the story remained a touchstone in the community and beyond. The little girl, now older, often spoke at safety events and school assemblies, sharing her experience with new generations. Ranger remained by her side for years, a living testament to the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. His actions continued to be cited in training manuals, news articles, and educational campaigns. The legacy of courage, instinct, and vigilance lived on, a reminder that even the smallest signals could have the most profound impact. The rest stop, once a mundane location on a busy interstate, had been transformed in memory into a place of life-saving heroism. Passers-by now recognized the significance of careful observation, the power of subtle communication, and the role that trained animals could play in emergency situations. The story of the child, Ranger, and Officer Brooks became part of the collective consciousness, an inspiring narrative of courage, trust, and loyalty that transcended ordinary experiences. The little girl, her mother, Brooks, and Ranger remained forever linked by that single extraordinary day. Their lives continued, intertwined by trust, instinct, and heroism. Ranger's presence reminded everyone that true courage could manifest in many forms, through a tiny hand signal, through the unwavering watchfulness of a dog, and through the calm vigilance of an officer. The legacy of that day endured as a story of hope, bravery, and the extraordinary connections that could save lives.